Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. David Herle here with your ever-loving political panel, Jordan Leichnitz, Scott Reid, and Kory Teneycke. Scott, you lost your Springsteen virginity last night. You saw Bruce for the first time in your life last night. I've got a Bruce Springsteen album behind me on my shelf. We're summoning the better angels of America together. Were you inspired by the greatness of America last night and the prophetic choice they're going to make tomorrow?
I most definitely was, David. As a matter of fact, I was elevated and lifted.
Mulrooney went?
Well, David, I've always had, as you know, a great affection for the fine people of the Jersey Shore. And that young Springsteen fellow sure does know how to strum a guitar. I found his talk of revving engines and working through the factory whistle most inspiring. Reminded me of my own father, who, as you know, was working class in Baie-Comeau. And I found I had much to relate to. And it was fantastic. Bruce was great. He didn't play Lost in the Flood, which would literally meant that I could just end my life happily. But it was 3 hours of fantasticness. I know you bitch and moan about Springsteen concerts, David, because you say they last too long. I have never spent 3 faster hours. I knew every beat and every syllable of every song. Unbelievable waves of nostalgia, hungry heart, thinking of my old pal Duncan Baker, who introduced me to Springsteen in 1980. So it was a fantastic event. And he was really light on politics. He made a passing mention, but he did not go, didn't go full Geldof on us. So
no, anything about the set list that made you think that he was thinking about the election?
Well, he started with She's the One. And so that captured some people's notice. He hadn't been using that to kick off the shows, and people thought perhaps there was a subtle message, but he's talking to Canadians. So like, you know, the 70-year-old guy beside me didn't get the message, if that's what it was intended to be. He was just like, pissed off that it wasn't Oh Sherry, you know, Sherry darling. It was great. It was fantastic. I was glad it was. I was the youngest person there.
It wasn't Oh Sherry by Journey. You were the youngest person there. Yeah.
Yeah. It was not. It was not a youth-filled crowd.
Well, you know, Hungry Heart was 45 years ago.
Okay, that's unkind, but
yeah, you were introduced to Springsteen 45 years ago.
No, it was great. Everybody was, waving, their diabetes medicine during it. And it was really inspiring.
All right, here's the rundown this week. The Liberal Party of Canada has produced ads, actual ads that they want us to see. I don't know if there's any media to support it. I haven't seen evidence of that. We'll talk about that and what's in those ads, break them down for you. Our cursed clipping is Tonda McCharles writing in the Star about Trudeau's relationship with Trump and what might come next if Trump is elected. And who needs a confidence and supply agreement anyways? Not Jagmeet Singh. He's supporting the Liberals in any event since cancelling the confidence and supply agreement. Will he pay a price for that? Do the Liberals pay a price for that? And finally, it's the great Mr. Pinsent and our Hey Yous. So, Jordan, Kory, great to see you. We've heard from Scott. Jordan, you're good?
I'm good. I'm here. We survived Halloween. It was a good time. And now we're in that time in Ottawa where it's really not a season. It's just gray. So, you know.
Yeah.
Surviving.
Yeah.
It's dark at 4 o'clock, you know, all those good things.
And just so I know, where are you going to be tomorrow night and what are you doing?
I'm actually going to be on a plane flying back from Toronto. So, and then I will be coming home to hold my partner's hand and obsessively refresh various...
I bet you'll be paying for the airline Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Are you kidding?
It works about 1 in 3 times.
It's my sheer force of will that's going to be flipping Wisconsin, guys. Like, this is what's happening. We just have to, you know, keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Kory, what are you doing for E-Day?
Well, I was planning on having folks over here, but I haven't gotten organized enough to actually send out invites. So I'm guessing that's not going to happen. But yeah, same as everyone else, sitting there with my laptop and watching results and trying to predict what's going to happen.
Watching the Needle, the New York Times Needle.
The Needle.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So have you all seen these Liberal ads?
Yeah.
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 Yep.
The Liberal team is fighting for you to build more homes and protect renters, to deliver dental care and free contraceptives and diabetes medications, to keep guns out of our communities, to make life more affordable with $10 a day childcare and the Canada Child Benefit, and to create new, well-paying jobs and build a thriving economy that works for everyone. That's real progress. When it comes to strengthening our public healthcare system, the Liberal team is fighting for you. After they secured vaccines to protect Canadians from COVID-19, they made investments to hire more family doctors and reduce wait lists. Now they're rolling out dental care, and they're getting pharmacare done to deliver free contraceptives and diabetes medications. Pierre Poilievre has made it clear that he would make cuts to all these investments, removing healthcare services from millions of Canadians. Canadians need progress, not cuts. We won't go back.
The slogans are fighting for you and we won't go back. The second one seems an obvious lift from Harris. And the first one is something that I remember hearing David Axelrod talk about in the Obama years when the economy's bad and you can't win on is the economy good or bad. You win on who's on your side in this economy, who's fighting for your interests in this economy. So this slogan could be that kind of a motivation thing. Kory, you do a lot of political advertising. What did you think of these spots?
I thought they looked like they came out of a pile of government research. Like it's, and I don't mean that in a good way. I thought they were pretty bureaucratic in tone and issue selection and pretty unoriginal. Like, you know, you picked up on one of the points I was going to make. You're literally stealing the slogan from the campaign going on to the south of you right now. It's a little on the nose, if you ask me. Probably not going to be winning any creativity awards. But, you know, also a little too rear view mirror. Like, you know, this is going through a list of supposed accomplishments from the last parliament and saying that they're at risk if Poilievre comes in. Well, you would have to get Canadians to agree that those are A, accomplishments, and B, that the world is going to be worse if Poilievre is in charge. And I just don't think they actually make that case terribly persuasively. I think the other thing that's interesting is they're not really a full negative spot. They're not a full positive spot either. There's some sort of chimera of the two, but a positive spot that, unless you're including the back of his head, don't include the prime minister. It's so it's, you know, what would I say in summary? They're tepid ads that I don't think accomplish a very clear attack line. Or a very clear positive message line. Like, I think it's just somebody stirred a bunch of shit in a bowl and threw it at the wall to see what would stick. But it's, I don't know, not great.
Scott, I'm interested in your overall take on the ads, but one of the things that I was curious about is I know that they feel that they need to establish a record, that they can't really go at Poilievre hard because people don't know what they've done, and that they need to establish their record, which they've been unable to establish through earned media, and they weren't doing paid government support for their program. So they're talking about all these things in there. But what does it do in an ad when you talk about things that people don't really believe have happened? So in the one ad, they talk about how they're building more homes, they're protecting renters and making life more affordable. Well, whose head is going to nod when they hear those things? And in the second ad about healthcare, they talk about hiring more doctors and reducing wait lists. So, I mean, they may think they've done those things, but I don't think Canadians think they've done those things.
Yeah, I agree with you. That is the government speak part of all this, right? Where you think the announcement of initiatives, or even, you know, in some cases, the implementation of them have met with acceptance and approval and credit. I look, my overall take, they're okay. I think that these ads, particularly these first couple of ads, have two jobs. One is to exist, right? Because there has been nothing that has existed. And I think moving as rapidly as possible to get them out was important, not just for internal purposes of, feeding the backbench and saying, see, we are going to play some cards, but literally forcing the machinery to start to reorganize itself around a political message. And I think the second thing was to move toward an attack. And they didn't move nearly as far or as fast or as crisply as I'd like on that second front, but they're moving toward it. So yeah, they feel... you can see how they're a work in progress. You can see their internal dynamics at play externally in the creative, right? So, well, we got to put some of our record in, and we have to take credit for this. We have to show, and that's a lot of them talking to themselves, and we have to have some of the PM in and all that. I would have much preferred they move quite aggressively into an attack posture. I like the idea of arguing that Poilievre is going to take away things and, trying to plant that idea. I don't think they have to say that thing is the daycare that you don't actually believe that you've received. And all you read about it is that, operators are questioning the scale and how it's going to work and so on and so forth. Listen, we've been sitting in the sand calling for water for a long time. So I want to give our buddy Bevan credit. He finally managed to make them put a pail down the well and bring up something. I thought the healthcare ad was more interesting. And I think that line of thought, I'm curious about that. I do think that people are anxious about the lack of family doctors, like that sort of frontline reality. I myself have had to deal with it with my parents in these last couple of years, as they've had some health challenges, and they don't have a family doctor in Belleville, Ontario, where you can hit the 401 with a baseball. And you're like, if this community doesn't have family doctors, what the fuck hope is there for truly rural and remote parts of the country? So I thought that was interesting because it demonstrates that they're picking up on an anxiety that people have, but it also highlights the bigger question, which is, let's assume these ads get better. Let's assume there's a big buy at some point. Will they help them? Do they come so late? And this is kind of an infuriating question if you're them, but do they come so late that even if they hit on the right issue, even if family doctors is something that gets people wound up, or even if the idea of cuts coming from Poilievre does people to consider, do they become the beneficiary of it? Does that cause people to move and migrate back toward the Liberal column? And as you've said, David, in your experience in 2018 when we were running that campaign, effective creative at this point might have the unintended effect of dislodging votes from your opponent and transporting them elsewhere. But that's a dick of a thing for me to say after we've been sitting here on this podcast for a year and a half saying, please advertise it. So at least the ads exist.
Yeah, you have to take that chance. Hurly-burlyites, as a refreshing change of pace here, I'm going to start with the conclusion. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, wants the widespread escalation of copper theft in Canada to end. The only way that's going to happen is if we pay more attention to it. Deterrence measures are heightened, and all levels of government join with industry to fix this massive issue and safeguard our essential services. So now, let's take a few steps back. I want to tell you how the crime happens in the first place and make it clear to everyone how the impacts of copper theft can put lives at risk. During road upgrade projects, thieves will arrive at night in pickup trucks, attach the wire on site, and just start driving. It results in an average loss of 800 meters of wire at a time. Or there's aerial theft. Somebody climbs a telecom pole and cuts a section of wire. It falls to the ground, they slice it up into smaller pieces and haul it away. Or thieves will crawl under manhole covers out of sight and cut copper lines, which is especially dangerous because of other ground wires under there that can kill. So it's a problem, eh? One that harms critical services, compromises public safety, erodes customer trust, strains resources, and impacts communities. Thefts and vandalism like these have resulted in the loss of over 200 million minutes of total outage time for major incidents, with over 170,000 customer impacts since 2021. Whole communities are losing their ability to connect to everything. Next week, a ray of light, some best practices examples, how government and providers in other countries are collaborating to combat the issue and target these bad actors. Jordan, this healthcare thing is interesting because it is obviously one of the biggest issues in the country, and it's obviously affecting political choice at the provincial level, for sure. If I was the Liberals, they have this problem I identified, which is they're saying that they funded reduced wait times and family doctors, but those are the primary crises that exist in healthcare. So it's, I think, going to be incongruent for people to hear them claiming to have solved that problem. And do you think there'd be any merit in actually going on the offensive against the provinces on that issue? If you were going to try to tell your story, which is, through the federal provincial transfers and through COVID, we've given the provincial governments billions and billions of dollars for healthcare. And if it's not showing up in your ER, ask them. Because we did our part. Wouldn't that be more effective?
Yes, I think that could be very effective. But I think that what we're seeing in these ads right now and the way that they're currently formulated, like this is basically the advertising extension of what we've seen the Prime Minister talk about, which is the notion, as both Kory and Scott have said, that this is simply a communications problem that we have. And so this is like the manifestation of that. Look, I think that there's a lot of things that could have been done in these ads to be more effective. The idea of going after the provinces and having a bit of a harder edge there is one of them. But these really, to me, read as ads. These looked like they were designed by committee. There's no emotional core to this. There's no attempt to rehabilitate Trudeau's image, numbers, anything like that baked within that. In fact, the fact that they have chosen to talk about the Liberal team, to really de-emphasize Trudeau in those ads, I think it's probably too cute by half to think that you can skate around that. If he's staying, you have to do something about him. I think, to Scott's point, that the important thing is their existence. Yes, this is true. These are clearly not the ads that the campaign team on the Liberal side has spent 8 months on. Okay, so this is, I think it's credit to Bevan that these were done. This was clearly something that was done in order to signal a change internally. And I think on that score, the audience is more, it's the Liberal caucus, it's internal, it's donors, it's all of those things. So if that's your audience and that's what you're trying to do, I think these probably get you where you need to go. But they're not persuasive, and they're not going to work with the electorate, and they're not going to solve some of the fundamental underlying political problems that the Liberals are facing. And I think that the point that Scott brought up in terms of where does it drive these votes, and particularly on the question of healthcare, is a really interesting one, because I would make the argument now that we're seeing a sustained period where you have the New Democrats and the Liberals effectively statistically tied outside of Quebec, and you are seeing Singh and the NDP trying to really again to that pharmacare, that dental care ask, that when you forefront those in your attack on healthcare, then you're increasing that risk, that you're driving people to a place where they already feel that when you ask the question about healthcare, New Democrats can easily be the answer for voters. And I think the other challenge, and this goes back to a bit what Kory was saying, is that these are also not negative enough. It is important, I think, to be able to say that Poilievre is going to cut healthcare. So the fact that they went there and did that and made that sort of clean line, it's good. This reflects the research. There's no silver bullet in terms of what's going to be, one and done effective in pulling down Poilievre's numbers. But we know that cuts to services, cuts to healthcare, in specific examples, this is what works sort of the best out of a gamut of options that are out there. So I think that negative argument is on the right track, but again, because of the way these ads are presented, because of the audience, because of what they're for, that's not like the persuasive formulation of that argument. So I think we're going to have to wait to see that, and hopefully there's somebody working on that.
Hey, Scott, on a small point, the Liberals seem to think that the image of Poilievre eating the apple is a bad one for him. but I think conservatives think it is a good one for him. What do you think?
I think it's actually, it gets at something, but I don't think it gets there all the way. So I think liberals read too much into it. They see the image and they say, see, this reveals him to be a mean-spirited, kick-down dink. And I think that's an important thing to surface. I think that's an important thing to put into the public debate between now and a vote. I don't think just a picture of him eating the apple does it. I think it lacks context. I think they're filling in too many blanks. They're making the mistake of thinking that everyone sees the world and understands the world and brings to the world the information that they have. And I think that's a mistake. If you're going to show that he's a dink, you have to say, people, you know, some people say he's a dink. Here's a picture of him being a dink. And in that picture, he was being a dink. And I don't think the Apple image on its own does it.
Well, moreover, what's the biggest problem with these ads and their mindset around this? They think that people think like they do. And I can give you a lot of polling that says quite conclusively that they don't. Like their view that the only problem that they have is a communications problem. Like they actually think they've been governing the country well, which I think is actually fucking hilarious to most Canadians that they would have that perception. But that's clearly where they're coming from. You hear it coming out of their caucus meeting every week. It's like, well, all we have is a communications problem. We're actually doing all these wonderful things. The only thing that's wrong is your fucking perception because you're too stupid to fully appreciate it. And the people in the comms office need to be fired clearly because they're not getting that good message out there. You know, that's just not true. People are actually suffering right now and they're actually angry at the government and they actually don't see the government as having done good things. And it's not just because the communications department was asleep at the switch. That's just not true. And they have a similar confirmation bias around Poilievre. They think that everybody hates Poilievre because he's elbows up and he's throwing these haymakers and he's being pissy and he's being sarcastic. Well, the target of the sarcasm and the pissiness is the Prime Minister of Canada. So here's a newsflash. You know why his positives are going up? Is because they're happy that he's doing it. Actually, they like it when he does it. Like they're angry at Trudeau, and he is the instrument to which the electorate is going to smite them with, right? So I just think they're coming at it from exactly the wrong perspective. They have this substance problem.
But you're wearing a campfire orange pocket square with an Oxford blue shirt. So I don't think we can take anything you say at face value.
He's a man of the people, Scott. I don't know what you're talking about.
I do polling and read polling. And
I do want to pick up on something Kory has said, and Kory has really dressed it up there for us. So maybe let's put it in some normal clothing. But I think that the idea of likability with Poilievre, it's an important question. It's one that I don't think yet we've really seen a concerted effort to go after him on. But I would say two things about it. The first is that it can be a double-edged sword because sometimes voters like an asshole, right? If they're an asshole for you, if that's the perception. So the real question is, are the Liberals or is anybody, third party, anybody else who's going after Poilievre going to be able to tie the idea that he's an asshole to the idea that he's working perhaps in his own interest, that he's working against your interest, that there will be some harm to voters? Like you have to drive clearly what are the stakes for people in it. And I think that is just a little bit what's missing right now in the way the Liberals talk about the Apple thing and all of what that represents.
I think that's critical.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I just think that's critical. Like Jordan is so correct in terms of the fundamental insight and how important it is to land it. If you're going to try to fight, and I don't know if you do the polling and it tells you that you ought to try to have this fight, but if you're going to have the fight over his character, right, then you have to say to people, look, he's an asshole machine. And no one cares if he's an asshole machine if the machine is pointed at Liberals. They only care if you convince them that the asshole machine, once Prime Minister, will be pointed at them. And that's what's left wholly incomplete in the apple munching.
I feel like we need to actually cue up the clip from Team America World Police on dicks, pussies, and assholes, and the importance that all three exist in your political environment.
America, fuck yeah!
Yeah.
All right, so Team America World Police, great movie.
God, it's good.
Let's just take a look at this slogan. We won't go back. I don't know what it means in this context. Like when Harris uses it, I presume it means to Trump. who was there just 4 years ago, and we're not going to go back to that craziness, that dynamic. But when you've been in office for 10 years, what does it mean? And nobody remembers your predecessor. We won't go back to what?
I think it means they needed to get ads out the door inside of 2 weeks. Like right. I don't think it makes sense for them to be using that slogan. I think that it also, if they are taking that seriously as a slogan, it betrays a fundamental misunderstanding about how the electorate views the next election.
Nobody's or their record.
That's right. Well, nobody is thinking about going back to the Harper years. And by the way, nobody is really thinking of those as a bad time at this point, right? There's a lot of water under that bridge. And, some of that is on the Liberals. Some of that is just on world events. But it's certainly not the animating thought. This is a change election. And the people that, the record that people are thinking about going back to or not is the Liberal record.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's lifted, though, pretty much from the Prime Minister's own talking points. Like when you look at his Erskine Smith, interview, or the one that he had with the two bozos that nobody's ever heard of, what was it, the Village something? Anyway, Village Square. He thinks that people were living in this dark age. And he came as like this Renaissance man and bestowed upon us this period of enlightenment in which we all learned to read poetry and appreciate the importance of the environment and woke values and on and on and on. And he actually thinks there's a dark age that we're going to be pulled back to, and that Canadians are sitting at home sharing his anxiety about this. Whereas Canadians at home are thinking of a day, a time not that long ago when they could afford their grocery bill and weren't laying awake at night worrying about their mortgage.
Sure. I like to look up words, figure out where they came from. And you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, to know how many come from railroading. Blowing your stack, for example. It originally referred to relieving the pressure inside a locomotive engine by releasing steam through the overhead exhaust or stack. Ditto, letting off steam. Ditto, blowing smoke. Train tracks gave us all sorts of expressions. Backtrack, on the wrong track, sidetracked, staying on track. Something you bought is just the ticket? Guess where that originated? Or tunnel vision, or light at the end of the tunnel. You can look up the term railroaded. You can make the grade. You might have bought a new car with all the bells and whistles. A political third rail. I could go on. Anyway, the folks at our sponsor CN have one particular favorite term at the moment, leaving the station on time. But they mean it literally. In the past few years, leaving the station on time and arriving on time has become a prime CN directive. It's actually more complicated than it sounds. Leaving the station on time means making sure the tracks ahead are clear, precisely coordinating the dozens of mile-and-a-half-long trains rolling along the network at any given moment, and making sure they can unload and reload efficiently at the end of the line. Whoops, see what I did there? Anyway, as a result, the velocity of CN's trains hasn't been as good in years. To most of the world, velocity means speed, but to a railway, it means the average number of miles its trains cover in a day. And what that crucial number means is good service, as in, making the trains run on time. Where service is concerned, CN has, yes, wait for it, a one-track mind.
I think it's a highlight. First of all, it's a lift, and so that's
you hate
just
the
lame.
lift,
right? I'll bet you one of the defenses they would mount, and I'm not talking about it, but I'll bet you they'll say, well, it tested. Like, maybe it's a lift, but when we put a bunch of stuff in front of people, they liked it. And that may be, but you still have to apply a level of reason and say, how does it actually work in the real world? And what does it mean? And the number one sin that's being committed here, in my view, is wasting your money on telling yourself what you want to believe. That's not the purpose of advertising. You want to believe that people think of the time before Trudeau as this Mad Max dystopian world that you saved us from. I'm picking up on Kory's talking points. And that's just not how the world is. That's how you want it to be. And you can't afford to waste time and money on a narrative that people don't believe. Go find something that they do believe that will help you and talk about that in your ads.
So in summary, though, these ads are catharsis. They're not actual persuasion. And if we didn't really get into the buys, but like on the buy side, you're not moving the needle 1 fucking millimeter with these buys. Not 1 millimeter.
Well, I can't find a buy, Kory.
Yeah,
well, I can't find a buy, Kory.
It's allegedly digital, and and you know, if it's a substantial buy, you can actually go online and look at it on fairly transparently with Facebook or Google. And
Facebook says only hundreds of dollars have been spent.
So there you go.
Right?
Do you think it's a transactional play?
Of dollars. What would it actually take, Kory? By the way, you've been most recently buying advertising. What would a reasonable national buy cost?
Look, we spent about $8 million on attack ads over 6 months, and in one market, and it's at that level you start to see movement. But what do they have to spend? 10 million, 15 million?
Right.
Easily. That's more than I have to prosecute to the next election, let alone the pre-writ. So
that's fair. I would just say, before we just absolutely put the steel toe boots to this thing, I'm assuming there's a transactional effort going on here. There's an imperative to get some ads and get some creative. That serves their interest in terms of solving some of the internal dissent. It allows them to signal change. You get the machine moving in a better direction. A light buy, a zero buy of hundreds of dollars probably is wise, because you might also be thinking to yourself, this first wave of ads, I just got to get some stuff up and running. I got to get them using muscles where they test stuff, they create stuff. I got to throw a bunch of shit in there that the prime minister insists on seeing because he wants to have his arguments reflected in the ads. Let's get this shit out the door. And by the way, part of its secret sauce is that there isn't a buy behind it. Meanwhile, I'm working on a suite of ads that hopefully I can sell internally that actually might be effective, that are sharper than this. And that's where we'll put real money behind. I'm hoping and praying that's what's going on.
Yeah.
That's logical.
Yeah.
Tough to hear those things on a winning campaign, though. I don't know. That's when the internal machinations are more than the consideration for where voters are at. I think that's a really tough dynamic.
Well,
the first step of going up the hill is to quit walking down.
Which one of your sad country music singers wrote that line?
It has a very Tom T. Hall feel to it. I spent 7 days in a country jail.
All right, let's get a little bit more substantive. Let's be serious people. Can we be serious people for a minute? Ton Charles in the Toronto Star wrote about the Canadian-American relationship and how it might be affected by the U.S. election. Here are some excerpts. No matter who wins on Tuesday, Trump or Kamala Harris, and no matter who is Canadian Prime Minister throughout the next president's 4-year term, Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre, David McNaughton said Canada has to understand the substantive reasons the U.S. takes positions it does on important matters like trade, defense, and security. The same sentiment would apply if Harris wins the election. He said American Democrats are more protectionist and isolationist now than at any time in recent history, and no Canadian politician should fail to heed their concerns. Personalities do matter, competency, backbone, charm, all those things matter, yeah. But at the core of it, competency is the most important part. That's where I think Harper and Bush got along. Harper and Obama got along, at least to a certain extent. They had a professional relationship and they worked at it, a conservative insider said. As for whether a Poilievre government would get along with Trump or Harris, the conservative insider said it would take a level-headed and adult approach to the relationship, no matter the stripe of the administration or ideological affinities, if any, adding that there are far fewer now between Canadian conservatives and the Republicans than in Mulroney's day. I don't think American demands will change between administrations. Tone might be different, but demands don't change. National interests tend to be pretty evergreen. The stakes are obviously high. The Liberal government has ramped up efforts to get ready for any outcome. Kirsten Hillman, Canada's ambassador to Washington, and 2 cabinet ministers were tasked in January with leading the outreach effort, supported by a special group at Global Affairs Canada. Hillman's team has been crisscrossing the states, talking to governors, local officials, and federal representatives. Premiers, business leaders, and union leaders were integral to Canada's charm offensive last time and will be again as needed. So, it sounds like there's a big effort on to sort of ring fence any administration with Canadian interests. Jordan, do you think that it has it matters to Canadian. Let's deal with the substance part first, and maybe get into politics. Is there a difference in the interests of Canada in the U.S. election?
Totally. Absolutely. And I think, and I understand the importance of sending a message that Canada will work with any administration. And certainly that's the factual case. The government, whatever government we have here is going to need to work with whatever government's elected in the U.S. But there are two issues in particular where a Trump administration would prove especially problematic for Canada. And that's the flat 10% across the board tariffs and the 2% NATO target. So those are two major differences, I would say, between an incoming Trump administration and a returning Democratic administration, where you do have, I think, particularly on the tariffs, potentially really catastrophic impacts for Canada that you just wouldn't see with Harris. So I understand the importance of making the argument that there's not a great big difference between how those governments will be treated, but there is, in reality, Trump's erraticness, in fact, I would say his record of actually doing what he says in those statements is very troubling and would have huge consequences for Canada. I do think there's a big difference.
Kory, what does your gut tell you about the future of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement?
That it's in jeopardy, but I think more for Mexico than Canada. I think I also disagree on one part of what Jordan was saying there. I think the 2% NATO thing is coming at us from both administrations. I think the current administration has been beating Canada over the head with that. The rhetoric around it is a little different coming from Trump, but the policy substantive nature of the ask and the demand is there. It's more politely delivered by one than the other, but I don't think there's a substantive difference in what they're asking for. But what is the larger thing that's going on in Canada is, a small player in this. It's a rivalry between China and the United States. China and its allies are doing some bad things out there right now. They're threatening to invade Taiwan. They're disrupting supply chains. They're funneling arms into Russia to fight the Ukraine. There's a lot of bad stuff that's happening, supported by North Korea and Iran. And those are realities that we're either going to play a part in helping. And so one is, a Western trading bloc, and there's going to be tariffs against Chinese goods and against Russian goods and Iranian goods, and maybe a greater propensity for Trump to entertain tariffs. But the fundamental equation's the same. We're on the American side of the tariff wall, or we're not. And there are things that we can do to make that more likely. We can take the Mexican approach of inviting Chinese manufacturers into our country, and then using the NAFTA agreement to get them to U.S. markets. I think that door is going to be shut. Or we could take an approach that is more aligned with the United States. I think that's probably the better path. And I think it's a path that we're going to be confronted with irrespective of who's in the White House. Look, there's a lot of things rhetorically that are different between the Biden administration and a potential Harris administration versus a Trump administration, the rhetoric being the biggest one. But in a weird way, Trump might be easier to deal with in some matters because he is so transactional. He is so, personality based and make a deal based. And that creates some opening. And I think, if we're to talk about accomplishments of this Liberal government, I think they understood that and handled it quite well in the initial NAFTA renegotiation. I'm not sure they would do as well this time because they're so far out over their skis rhetorically against Trump.
Scott, you dealt directly with a president. Excuse me. Let me get my lips working here. You dealt directly with a president. How much do you think personal relationships matter in these things, or the personalities that are involved, or is there a big deep state function on both sides that actually manages this relationship?
I think that David put it well in the piece. I think the reality is that self-interest dictates these these transactions, these decisions, these dynamics. A good personal relationship can help on something that's not central to self-interest. So, acid rain and being in favor of it for Ronald Reagan and taking action on it and George H.W. Bush, they were able to sort of make a give on that. That was fine. Didn't contradict some of their core self-interests. And as a consequence, the personal appeal of someone that they preferred on balance to say yes to, from like Brian Mulroney. So that helped. But if it's in contradiction to your core self-interest as a nation and America's self-interest as a nation, no friendliness, no amount of personal phone call and bon ami is gonna counterbalance that at all. I have a really strong view about this issue, and I don't think we are taking it nearly seriously enough. I think that this assumption, as said in the article, that, look, the demands aren't going to change between the two because those are set in American trends. Really, it's just going to be a difference in tone and rhetoric and volubility. I think that is dead wrong. I think that is demonstrably wrong. It's an apparent that it is wrong right now. Kory says we have to pick whether we're going to be on the American side of the tariff wall or not. That's a good point, except it makes the assumption we'll be invited to be on the American side of the tariff wall. And I don't think that's an invitation that will be coming to Western allies and countries. I think that if Trump is elected, he will move on the 10% import tax. I think that will place everybody except the United States on the outside of that tariff wall. I think that he will views the United States as an island. He's not looking at a bloc that includes America at the middle of it with other nations. And I think the problem is this. I think that if Trump is elected, he will move on these things aggressively. And just like his statements on Truth Social, he won't be edited for grammar or rationality. His presidency will be unedited this time around. And I think that has real problems, not just for us, but for a whole slew of countries that ought to be natural allies of the United States. And so when I hear people say things like, listen, the reality is, this kind of condescending foreign policy speak you get from these people that are like having lunch, for 2.5 hours in the middle of the day. And, they ask, Reginald, the soup's different today, and they say things like, it doesn't really matter who's in the White House. Ultimately, these issues triumph and they will push. Fuck that. We are in a different world with a different beast in a different time in that beast's life if we have to face Trump. And the Prime Minister of Canada, who is Justin Trudeau, will be forced to come out. People go, oh, well, it's just bullshit politics. That whole establishment will be critical of Trudeau when, in order to defend Canadian interests, he'll come out aggressively against Trump's aggression, and they'll say, oh, he's just trying to leverage it because he's in such political peril. Well, that may be true for Trudeau, but what choice will any prime minister have but to be strident and direct against this administration? And if you think that a few congressmen dotted on the border or a couple of Republican governors will matter a fuck, this is a guy who was prepared to see his vice president hanged in the public square. He's not possible to surround with this kind of, conventional strategy. So we're going to be in confrontation, and that's going to be true for Trudeau, and then people will question his motives, but it will be true for Poilievre if and when he becomes prime minister, because Trump will make it so, not just with Canada, but with any Western ally, because he's a crazed dog. Well, and that's the simple truth.
But this hyperbolic, breathing into a paper bag, narrative around Trump foreign policy, if you're actually looking on a policy basis, you see more rationality in his foreign policy than you do in most aspects of him. And you've also seen Biden largely lift large segments of his foreign policy from Trump. Like what is the Trump legacy? Is Trump legacy?
Okay, but I'm not buying what Kory's selling here.
That's nice.
This is a guy whose operating assumption about foreign policy is to dramatically escalate every global conflict in order to somehow magically de-escalate them. This is not a guy who's attached to anything other than his own self-importance. It's certainly not reality.
Yet my point remains, and it is true, that the Biden administration has largely maintained the approach on China and tariffs that was started by Trump. And they have continued it. In fact, in some areas, they've increased the tariffs more than Trump had them. So, and when you're actually listening to what they're saying, the difference is mostly focused on the 10% across the board tariff. We'll see if that comes to pass. But on the other
whoa, stop right there.
wait,
So your assumption, you're one of these people that says he doesn't mean it?
No,
we're watching this guy, and we don't think he means it?
You're trying to change my point. My point being that...
We'll see if it comes to pass. That's what you said.
Yeah, that's part of what I said. The bigger point, which you guys are so affected by Trump derangement syndrome that you can't actually hear what anyone else says that's nuanced around this stuff. The fact is that large segments of the Trump foreign policy were picked up and maintained by Biden, and that's just a fact.
This is going to be a different incoming administration, Kory. This guy is no longer surrounded by people who are holding him to any kind of norms. That is gone.
McNaughton's point is basically correct. Like, the U.S. has interests here, and either party, either administration is going to be bringing some of these issues to our door.
No, that's a false homogeneity.
Scott, don't go there. I want to take you somewhere else. Listening to Kory talk about Trump.
This guy sucks a microphone like a dick, and we're going to expect nuance out of his foreign policy? Come on.
His stroke was pretty good, though. He's practiced that.
Let's not go down that road, but I had the same thought.
I was unprepared for that this morning, friends.
Scott, listening to Kory talk about this, do you think there are possibilities for the Liberals to wedge Poilievre and the Conservative Party on Trump after this election? By forcing them to take positions on things he does, forcing them to distance themselves from him, forcing them to criticize him where Canadians would be critical? Or will the Conservatives have no trouble just fucking joining that bandwagon?
I think it'll be reasonably easy for Poilievre to navigate because, one, I do think there's going to be this high hat foreign policy tut-tut that will kick in. And so at the first sign of Trump aggression being met by aggressive stance from Trudeau, you'll hear that. So you'll have to get through that wall of sound, and then by and large, I think it's going to be reasonably easy if Poilievre wants to be astute about it to say, look, this is all painted with Trudeau's partisan desperation. We can defend Canada's interests and take a hard line with the White House, just like he does. Maybe we don't even differ on these policy issues, but we can go about it in a more professional, constructive way. They're just motivated by the fear of the noose that's waiting for them when eventually they face Canadian voters. I think he'll be able to use that construct to navigate through a lot of this. If they want to fight on some of these issues, if they want to actually have a throwdown and side with Trump against Canadian national interests on issues like tariffs, then I think that would be a dreadful mistake. But I don't think they would even want to do that from a policy standpoint, and politically, I think they know that's stupid.
Well, it just feels to me like the Liberals and the NDP are going to be under pressure from their base in a world where Trump is still relevant after Tuesday, either because the election is contested or because he's won the election. The Liberals and the NDP are going to face pressure from their base to be really vocally anti-Trump, to be really calling him out on everything that he does that's offensive. And they're going to have to decide when that's in their interest to do it and when they have to push back against that. But at the same time, it feels to me like a lot of the conservative base does not feel about Trump the way the base of the Liberals and the NDP does, and would not be happy with a lot of criticism of Trump coming out of their leadership. So I think it is an interesting dynamic that creates some pressure on both sides.
Yeah. Well, I think it's easier to navigate than in practice than it might seem in theory.
Well, I don't think the conservative voting pool, like if you look at the percentages of the Canadian public that basically are leaning Harris, it's the majority of people in the conservative voting pool as well. So I don't think it's quite so complicated. Where I think it's different is I'll just anecdotally speak from people that we interact with. I think they're less invested in the outcome of the U.S. race. I don't think they view it as some sort of proxy fight in which they have to have a stake. Like you would think that people on the progressive left here in Canada are voters in the U.S. election, and they're not. And guess who's not your president if you're a Canadian? Every single person who doesn't hold U.S. citizenship. That's true. It doesn't matter. We don't choose. I'm not saying it doesn't matter who the U.S. president is, but it doesn't matter who you like and who you don't. It's not your choice. It's a foreign country. They choose their own president. They're going to choose whoever they're going to choose. And it's incumbent upon us to deal with that reality in the interest of Canadians in as rational and adult-like fashion as possible. I'm not sure we're going to see a lot of that coming from certain quarters of the left.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and to that question, for the NDP, there will be, it's clear, it's easier for them. They're not in government, right? So they have more capacity, I think, to voice some of those concerns. But yes, for the Liberals, there are good reasons why they may have to be circumspect. But I also think that it becomes clear, the instant, if you have an incoming Trump administration who makes an early move, say, on tariffs that is so clearly contrary to the interests that Canada has, I think you see everybody line up, and I don't think that would be all that complicated for the Conservatives.
Well, let's stick with the NDP for our last segment of the show. And so when Jagmeet Singh tore up the confidence and supply agreement, and I use those words because he used those words, he did it, as we've discussed on this show, with some pretty stark language about the government, that it was corrupt and that it was in the pockets of big business. And didn't deserve their trust anymore. But they have not defeated the government since then. And now that the Bloc has made it clear that they will vote against the government for not acceding to their demands, Singh came out and said, we will not defeat the government, at least in the short term. I don't remember that there was a time frame given. So, Jordan, I want to ask you a pretty direct question about this. It really makes me wonder whether the NDP are actually going for the change anti-liberal vote in the country and trying to compete with the Conservatives for that, or whether they are trying to ultimately collapse the liberal vote. And they're actually trying for the continuity vote. They don't want to be the spear carriers against the government. They want to be the inheritors of the government's position as the alternative to the Conservative approach.
I think that they will try to play as many cards as they have in their hands to squeeze more concessions out of the Liberals that they will then claim as their own until the moment that there are no more concessions to be had, and then they will happily drive a spear into the heart of the Liberals. I think that what you're seeing there is an analysis on the part of the NDP that there is still juice to squeeze from these guys. Singh has been pretty clear that he's not looking to bring things down this fall. So I think that you have a timeline leading up until Christmas that's relatively certain. The Bloc's sort of strange strategic move where they managed to flame themselves out really inside of a month put this back in Singh's court, I think, earlier than was anticipated. But now he has some options, right? He can make some demands. I think the Liberals are in a position where they are absolutely going to need to play ball with him. And he's going to try to build on and shore up the record that the NDP has been able to create on pharma, on dental, on workers' rights, on things like that. So my bet is that we're going to see them coming forward with some concrete asks. I'm not hearing that there are serious discussions happening between the parties yet, but that will come. Inevitably, it has to. The Liberals really have no choice but to deal with him. And I think you're going to see, notwithstanding the strong language, and, just to speak to that, I think that because the agreement had so closely bound Singh and Trudeau, when Singh broke up the agreement, the language had to be really strident so that people knew that it happened, basically, right? That was designed, I think, to make it outside of the Ottawa bubble. And so I would read the nature of that language more around a communications imperative than necessarily a practical one. And I think now on the menu in front of them, there's all kinds of stuff, right, that they can ask for. So they could look at speeding up timelines around pharmacare implementation, particularly if the life of this government may be short into next year. That also has a nice side effect if they're able to get an agreement on that. If they do that, then you have a credible attack on Poilievre that he wants to, for example, take away free contraception. That's kind of fun. Broader eligibility around dental care could be sped up. So there's things on the health file that they could move ahead on. But I think that you're going to see Singh pushing on affordability because that's an area that they sort of don't necessarily have a clear win in now that they would like to have in their quiver going into the next election. So in the past, he's gone out, he's talked about things like getting GST credits boosted, child benefits boosted. But I think you may see also HST off home heating. We're coming into a winter season. People are worried about their bills. But what I think you're not going to see, I think that there is certainly an acknowledgement that there's not an appetite for big programs. This is not the moment. So I think that if Singh is smart and the team there is going to remain focused, then they're going to be looking for whatever concession they get is like a real thing that people are going to have in their hands prior to the next election. So there's a lot that they could ask for, and I think that dance is just beginning.
Kory, what do you think of the situation they're in? And do you have any thought about my little hypotheses that they've decided that actually the easier path for them is not to fight Poilievre over unionized dock workers in British Columbia, but to fight him over urban women, but to fight the Liberals over urban women, steal their vote?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, clearly. Like they with one exception, and when they chose to tear up the agreement, they did it with such vigor and rhetorical flourish. I can't help but think that was designed for voters in a very close by-election in Manitoba, and they went back to basically, the plan that you've put on the table, which is to be the inheritors of the Liberal legacy as opposed to the opposition to it. And and I'm not sure that isn't a smart play. Like I think there's probably a lot of merit in taking that approach. But, you are going to be giving up some seats in order to gain, have a shot at gaining others. But, if you're looking at the electoral map for them right now, I don't think they're going to beat the Conservatives in Windsor. I don't think they're going to beat the Conservatives in Northern Ontario and in places like Kamloops in the interior of BC. I think those seats are going to be gone for them either way. But where I think they're increasingly competitive is in downtown urban areas where they are the natural inheritors of that. It's like, you're progressive and you generally like the kinds of things the government's focused on, but you don't like Trudeau and you don't like these guys and you think there's time for a change. Well, that seems to me to be what they're presenting for people. But it comes at a price. And so, you see them tactically dipping in to take a much tougher line to win a by-election here or there. But I think the overall theme of what they're doing would seem to me to be more oriented and competing for urban female voters, contraceptives for free, etc.
Scott?
I think your question is exactly the right one. It's definitely something I've been thinking about. It's hard for me to interpret Singh because I find that a lot of these moves are kind of convulsive and sometimes contradictory. I thought tearing up the agreement so flamboyantly was kind of silly and didn't really achieve a goal. I did think, but I don't want to read too much into it, I did think that this week was smart because it was quiet and it was quick and it was unaccompanied by a bunch of, and if I don't get this and this and this and this, then eventually we'll bring them down. And I think for Singh, that's the right way to go right now. Just go, look, you know what? We're not going to move on. People won't even notice. They won't even hear about it. Maybe I'm not bringing them down in the near term. We'll get to the other side of Christmas and we'll make our decisions, because I do think that the logical play for them is to be an easy place for Liberals who look at their voting intention in a campaign, in the next campaign, and maybe the ass is falling out of Trudeau and the Liberals, and they go, well, where can I take my vote? And be that comfortable, not fire-breathing opponent where 10% of the 22 could go. And then suddenly you're at 30 or 32 or 33%. And so I just think that's rational. I don't know if that's what they're doing, but I do think that's rational. So I think your question is exactly the right one. I think it hints at probably the only wise strategy. And I'll just add this. Imagine a world where Trudeau does compete the next election. Imagine if you're the NDP. Trudeau, with all of his luggage, all of his barnacles and weight, goes in that next election, competes. It's a massive change election. The Liberals get beaten around the ears, but they still emerge with the second largest number of seats in the House of Commons. And so after all of that, this historic opportunity with a leader who's as uniquely unpopular as Trudeau could be in this next election, and the NDP come away still in third place, and like that would be a monster opportunity missed. So I think for them, you've got to start to put your head down and say, how do I get back to the second largest number of seats in the House? How do I get to official opposition? We got there once, and then we pissed it away. We can't piss it away again. And this is our shot. And we can't assume that it will come around again if we don't take full advantage this time. So I think being an attractive place for Liberals in that analysis makes a lot of sense.
Well, in fairness, it does appear like a Liberal collapse comes around. That bus is maybe a once every decade bus. But, you know, it's here now. And so, yeah, the NDP has to be ready to get on it if they're going to be able to seize that opportunity. And look, I think that it makes sense for the party when you consider that the, switch voters, right? So folks who would be, considering voting for a party other than who they have historically voted for. So for the NDP, 2/3 of those would come out of the Liberals and 1/3 would potentially come out of the Conservatives. And that's across the country, right? So obviously you have a great deal of variation in different regions. But there's more to be had there from those Liberal voters. And that's a first step. But I don't think that the party is necessarily writing off some of those orange-blue fights, but they are going to be looking to get some of those free-floating Liberal voters because they are easier to peel off right now. Those are voters who are now shopping. Okay, and when we're in a Conservative wave, the Conservative voters are more motivated, they're stickier, they are less likely to be peeled off. So I think that what we're seeing is a strategy that reflects that order of interests.
Okay, but I want to ask all three of you this question. I listened to Singh. And, in the context of authenticity and realness, Singh's having trouble making a connection with people. And I don't think he ever says anything that actually sort of penetrates or sounds real. And on this occasion, I feel the same way again. Like, here's his line. His line is, the Liberals are corrupt and in the pockets of big business. His line is that they are ready for an election. His line is that they will not provoke an election. Why doesn't he say something that sounds true? Like, we don't want to put the Conservatives in office before we have to. It looks like they would win if there was an election right now. That's bad. Or we're not quite ready for an election. We'd like to be more ready. Or the Liberals, as bad as they are, at least better than the something. You have to say something that sounds true. Because the things he's saying are not all true. Yeah. Right?
But nor is he talking to you, David, right? Like, that's the other thing. And I think, we have to be careful about how much of that conversation we understand is being focused internally here in Ottawa and how much is trying to reach over the heads of people. The vast majority of Canadians still just really kind of want their government to work, right? And so the idea of provoking an election just for the sake of gamesmanship is not really a winner. And I think you actually also have heard Singh very clearly say, we're not going to hand over this government to Pierre Poilievre. Like, he has been out there and he has said that. And actually, that's how he has framed the decision not to pull support from the government this fall. And I think that makes sense because that meets the nod test for people who are concerned about a potential Conservative win, that he's not sort of being irresponsible with that power. With respect to his communications authenticity, look, I think he's got good moments, and we've certainly seen some of them over the years where he really does have an ability to connect and even go viral and really penetrate with a lot of people who are not following politics. And that's a rare gift. But those tend to be moments that are unscripted. They tend to be moments that are interactions with non-politicians, that are things that are happening outside of a purely political context. And I think that, his team has to look at ways to find the elements that work in those moments and create more opportunities for that person to surface. I'm not sure, him at a mic in front of the House of Commons is not like his shiniest place, right? And some of those are pieces of craft, right, that his team has to iron out going into the next campaign. But I think the core of the message largely holds. Canadians are not, unless they're Conservative supporters and they are just waiting for their moment to pass judgment on Justin Trudeau, most people are not clamoring to go to an election tomorrow, and certainly not the voters that Singh is currently courting. And so his message makes sense in that context. And I think it gets him easily until Christmas.
You guys agree?
Not really.
Corey's just been waiting for his moment. I think you're channeling what you'd like him to do more than what he's actually doing. There's maybe little bits of his narrative around, I'm not going to play Pierre Poilievre's games, that would indicate that that strategy you laid out is part of what they're doing. I think there's a much cleaner execution of that, if that's true, that seems so obvious that I think he would be doing it if he wanted to, which is to lay out the risks of a Conservative majority government and say that we're not going to put Pierre Poilievre in office, and therefore we will continue to keep this government alive, but do a much more aggressive framing vis-a-vis the Conservatives. And I'd be talking about how weak the Liberals are, and that Canadians need a viable alternative to the Liberal Party to stop a Conservative victory. I would be very explicit of going for the jugular, but this is just so federal NDP. It's like they're always so tepid. They're always so afraid to actually get in the arena and contest power. I don't know why that is, because they certainly don't have that problem provincially where they're competitive. But it's a loser mentality. They don't actually go in and drive to win in a way that other political parties or even they themselves do in other jurisdictions. It's this tepid, European proportional representation deal-making bullshit, which excites exactly zero voters. So, I don't know. No, actually, just to be clear, I think they could probably get Nate Erskine's best vote with that.
Yeah, well, maybe. But it's not wedging in a way that you do if you actually want to go for people's votes and go to win an election. And look, what would a win for the NDP be? The win for the NDP would be a substantial seat advantage over the Liberals coming out of the next election. That's a win. But in order to get that, you can't say, hey, we're going for second, or a very strong third. That is not a message that you put on your banner and march into battle with. You've got to actually go to win. You actually have to make yourself be the alternative and say what you're actually defending. But they're kind of just this muddled, mushy, triangulation that excites exactly zero voters, in my view.
All right, Scott, you get to bat cleanup on this show.
I don't think he's any good. And I just think that is apparent all the time. I don't believe that he's pursuing the strategy that Jordan outlined. I don't believe that he's being more muted now so that he can pursue a broader strategy. I think he moves in different directions at different times. I don't think he connects with people. I don't think that there's this mythology within the NDP that when he's on the harnessed on the campaign trail and people see him interacting with folks, he's really authentic and likable. I just don't think that that's actually proven to be true. It certainly has been proven to be true enough that it actually generates seat wins for him. And so I think he's better off just being quiet, hoping for the election, making the election happen in the spring, being really loud when that happens, that, he's got to take the government down at that point, and then trying to get Liberal votes in a changed election. I just think it's as simple as that. And I think he'll probably fail. And then I think New Democrats will remember these kinds of conversations that I'm sure they're also having with themselves and say, Jesus, man, I wish we had changed horses in midstream because this guy wasn't good enough. and couldn't get us there. And this isn't just a once in 10-year thing. This doesn't roll around every 10 years. This in and out rolls around every 10 years. But this happened in 84, where there was a chance that the Liberals could be flushed right out of the center of the spectrum and vanish. That happened in 2011. There was that chance. It could happen this time if Trudeau stays. And for the NDP to do anything other than everything to try to capitalize on that is insane. And I don't think he can capitalize on it.
I just want to observe in closing, before we move off this, how both Kory and Scott, despite the naysaying, both moved the goalposts there, that the expectation the NDP will now become official opposition in the next election. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, what the hell else would it be?
Yeah. Like that's the natural
for sure.
outcome of the
that has to be the goal. That has to be the goal. Yeah, but I think the idea that we're moving the goalposts, that's the expectation, is also quite telling.
You could have that outcome and still lose seats from your current number, though, too. Just for the record.
Kory, stop. Jesus.
The only authentic and interesting moment we've seen from the guy is that day he wheeled on that fella and said, "Hey, fuckface, let's throw down." Like, I mean, honest to God, that was the only appealing.
I bet that's his best day. I bet that's his best day he's had in a long time.
Me too.
So more fistfights with citizens. That's what we're going to.
All right.
No punching down, though. No punching down. Just get into fistfights with voters.
Hey, can you believe that the great Gordon Pinsent lent his voice to our little show? Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's amazing.
All right, let's bring in the Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Jordan, you want to go first?
Well, I do. Speaking of punching down. So my Hey You is going out to Danielle Smith. So it was a big week. Survived convention with 91%. So I think her team will obviously be breathing a big sigh of relief on that. Also brought forward absolutely virulent anti-trans legislation this week that had been promised. And my Hey You is that you just witnessed 2 provincial elections where this type of stuff was a symbol of wrong priorities for conservative-oriented governments. You can ask Higgs how that went, demonstrating that was, or Scott Moe, when he said it's his top priority, how voters viewed that. Things are not going great in Alberta right now. You've got high unemployment. You have ERs shutting down. You have crumbling schools. You have all manner of actual problems. So my Hey You is that you got your 91%. You did what you needed to do in the room of 6,000 people who are the only ones who view this as a central issue. And you can now stop. So you can not move ahead on this. You can put this on the back burner. You do not need to proceed at the expense of some of the most vulnerable people in the province. And that's my Hey You.
All right, thank you. Scott, you got one?
Yeah, my Hey You is to a group of people who do not listen to the pod, do not know the pod exists, do not know that I exist. I'm talking to men who are approximately like me in the states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And by that, I mean you're white, you're middle class, you're upper middle class income,
you're a little flabby,
you're university educated. Yes, and you're not getting any tighter around the waist. And my appeal to you people who, all things considered, would vote Republican is just stay home, right? I want some marginal percentage of you to not get out to vote tomorrow. You don't have to vote Democrat. All right, I'm just asking you, just go for a beer with your buddies, stay late at work. Just don't go to vote tomorrow because I think that when all is said and done, it's going to be whether those people underrepresent in the vote tomorrow that could make the difference. Because I think women are going to come out. I think they're going to come out in bigger numbers than people think. And I think they're going, because we've not seen choice not drive votes since it was taken away, but it's going to be dudes like me in the United States and in those states in particular who, if they just decide to take a pass, will make the difference. So please, just go fishing.
All right. Kory, Hey You.
Well, I was going to do Danielle Smith as well, but you'll be shocked to hear that it's going to be a little different spin on the whole thing.
You tell, Kory.
So a heartfelt congratulations to Danielle on the leadership support number. But I was going to point to a different issue. Yes, very heartfelt. I'm a big Danielle Smith fan. I think she's one of the more talented communicators that conservative politics has produced in a long, long time. But I took note of the ad campaign that they're running against a carbon emission cap, which I actually think getting rid of is very important for Canada. And I also think it's very important for cleaning up CO2 emissions globally. If we can export more cleaner energy to displace dirtier energy, that is a good thing for the global environment. And I think they were going to spend $7 million on that campaign. So my hey you is, hey, Danielle, congrats on your victory, and add a 0 to that number. And let's actually go out and make a case around energy exports and how that can actually be very good for the global environment at the same time.
All right. Thank you, Kory. My hey you, well, I'm a superstitious guy. And when the Canadians or the Habs, when the Canadians or the Riders are playing, and by the way, Riders in the Western Final, let's go, baby, are playing, I wear the paraphernalia and I create shrines in the living room and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm wearing my All the Way with LBJ t-shirt. I'll likely be wearing it right through to Wednesday, if not longer, depending how long it takes. And I'm calling on LBJ to summon the ghosts that sent the extremists packing in 1964 with Barry Goldwater, and summon the better angels of the American public, and let's have a clear, clean win for Kamala Harris. Well, it actually probably won't be tomorrow night, sadly, but because of the way the balloting works. But let's have a vote so clear that it can't be contested, because the thing that I fear the most is a close race and what happens after that in America. So with that, that's our show. Thanks for tuning in. And thanks for putting up with Canadian politics in this week of all times. I want to thank Kory and Scott and Jordan for being here. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. And all of you are cursed. By God, you're the best fans. You're the best fans out there. Thank you very much. See you then. See you next week.